Hey everyone, welcome to part 5, the last part of the Jurassic World Alive 2.14 tier list, the top tiers. In this video, I'll be going over low tyrant, mid tyrant, high tyrant, and overlord, finishing off the tier list. Hope you enjoy. Starting off in low tyrant with Antarctovenator. In my opinion, one of the most overrated creatures in the game. It got changed in 2.9. It got a damage buff. I think it got a. I can't remember if it had this armor. It had 20% before, or if it got increased 20% in 2.9. And they changed Definite Rampage to Revenge Definite Rampage, and they might have changed around the resistances a little bit. But yeah, it's it has a very high skill floor. Um, and its space stats are pretty average. Its resistances are decent. Um, its moveset is good, but it could be better. I just don't really. I can't find. I can't get this thing to work. Basically, like it's not bad. I just think it's overrated. It is a pretty decent revenge killer though, because that revenge definite rampage that on turn one, it's unblockable. There's literally nothing you can do to block the damage unless you're a flock. All right, Dracoceratosaurus. This one got buffed in 2.7, as you may remember from that tier list video series. Yeah, it's a pretty average, unique swapper. Um, it's got pretty average health and speed, but very good attack. It's D-cell immune, even though it's a cunning. And its moveset's pretty good. Swap its Savagery is obviously great. Cleansing Impact's a good turn one if you want to get out, or you could go Acute Stun to stall for Cunning Rampage. And this is a Cunning that can beat Gemini Titan. Gemini Titan may not be particularly good anymore. In fact, it might even be the next creature. No, we still have a couple more before we get to it. But overall, Triceratosaurus, I think, is quite underrated. Entellomania. Um, yeah, it's basically a very offensive tank. It's got good survivability because of that armor. It is quite slow, but it has really good damage. And then it's got massive multiplier. It can do persistent ferocious strike into resilient impact into devastation for absolutely monstrous damage. It's just that with how meta stuns are right now, this thing does not do well against stuns. Like Scorpius Rex Gen 3 absolutely obliterates this thing. But yeah, generally it is another mid tier unique. This tier is full of mid tier uniques. Next is a Licospix. I think a Licospix is probably the best creature in this tier. Either this or Gemini. Um, but it's pretty solid. It's quite tanky for a cunning. It's got good attack. It's fast. It's got pretty good resistances. And it has a ton of distraction. It's got good multiplier spam with the Revenge Distracting Impact. You go that and then pounce, then that and then pounce, for constant, consistent damage. Instant distraction. Say if you want to stall to wear off a deceleration effect. Yeah, this thing is a pretty decent cunning, but again, the meta tanks obliterated. Gemini Titan. This is basically our Dentist Maxima, but better. It's got less health and crit chance, and less vulnerability resistance. Those are the only disadvantages. And the less vulnerability resistance and less crit chance is a barely noticeable one. Well, I guess its invincibility move has a slightly longer cooldown, but again, I don't really think that's a big disadvantage either. Uh, yeah, it's got distract resistance. It's got more damage. It's a little bit faster, and it has a better moveset because definite shield advantage is absolutely amazing. It's literally a definite defensive rampage. That is really good. Gemini has just been power crept a lot by things like Skuna and Ankylux. Yeah, it's just power crept. Magna, um, another quite power crept unique. It also does really bad against some of the really good swappers. Like Parasaurolops being as meta as it is a big threat to Magna. Uh, it's got pretty good base stats. The only stat here that isn't really good is health, and its health's quite mediocre. It's got very good resistances and a pretty good moveset. So on paper, this thing looks absolutely amazing. In practice, it is quite mediocre. Uh, it just struggles against the swappers, really. Um, yeah, that's all I have to say about this. Quite versatile, though. Mammalania, the tankiest creature in the game. This thing has ridiculous effective HP, the most effective HP in the game, and it is very annoying because of that. However, its damage output is quite mediocre, and it's not very versatile either. Its resistances are pretty good. It's two best immunities in the game. It's got mid-level speed, surprisingly, and it can stall pretty well because it can heal. It's just that damage output's not very good. 4,000 in 2 turns is quite mediocre. In fact, it's on the very low end for a unique. And it generally just doesn't do well against some of the top meta threats, especially if with the resurgence of Fierce seen in 2.14, with Alberto Spinos and Mortem Rex being better again. So yeah. Overall, it's still really good. It's well, not really good. It's still not bad. Alright, Pucandactylus. This thing got a pretty large buff in 2.9. I did overrate the absolute hell out of it after that buff, but I still think it's a little bit underrated. Basically, it got a little bit of a health buff. It got a pretty hefty damage buff. It got a crit chance buff. It got some extra resistances. And it got distracting impact instead of distraction. Yeah. Overall, basically that buff allowed it to do a lot more damage and be a bit more versatile. Its main issue is that it doesn't have anything to do in turn 3 to deal damage besides just stall and get a counter off. You usually go Fearless Flap and an instant distraction, or sorry, Fearless Flap, Distracting Impact, and then, depending on what you're facing, Side Flap or Group Instant Distraction. Overall, it's not bad. It's just another mid-tier unique. It is a good cunning counter-attacker, though. It is good at stalling and getting counters off. Stegosaurus, this thing has had a rough ride since the last tier list series. There has been a lot of changes. In the last tier list series, it was one of the weakest uniques in the game. It was absolutely terrible. And now I think it's pretty okay now. Where is it? There it is. So, in 2.11, it got a buff. It got a damage buff from 1,000 to 1,150, and it got instant invincibility changed to a group instant invincibility, which really only makes it better in raids, and then it got a armor piercing counter. The counter was really the main thing there. So I still think it was a pretty weak unique then. I was a little bit too harsh on it, but it wasn't very good. And then, in this update, they changed the armor-piercing counter to raking counter, and they gave it Merciless Alert, which means that it finally has a usable turn 1 that doesn't automatically make it run. Thank you, Jam City, or Ludia, or whoever, for this. Darix doesn't suck anymore. Yeah, you can swap it in, get that counter with the free invincibility, and then do this big hit on turn 1, this big bleeding impact. And then you can maybe stall with the shield. And then you can do and by that point you might be on less than half health. So that by that point you can do the threatened state of Merciless Alert, which is a run. Although actually you probably won't run because... No, you will. That's on turn 3. Yeah, you will be able to run because the bound will be done. It's not still not a very good unique, but it is significantly better than it was before. And overall, I think this Darts isn't very bad. It's decent. Alright, mid-tyrant. These are, the uniques in this tier are overall pretty good uniques, but not absolutely great uniques. And the Apexes here are some of the weaker Apexes. Although there aren't really any trashy Apexes anymore, like there were before. Like Mortem before this update was pretty bad. Anyways, First one is Sarah Magnus. Sarah Magnus, it's basically it got this story. This is the best creature in the game in 2.7. In fact, it was the best creature in the game for a very long time, and then it got hurt pretty badly. It got its speed reduced, it got its crit chance reduced, it got its armor reduced, and it got a big damage nerf. And then, yeah, so basically it was just its main nerf was to the damage, and then it got power crept by new swappers being added. This nerf was in 2.10, and then 2.11, Parasothops is added. Yeah, this thing got power crept. It got incredibly power crept. It's not bad. It's just outclassed, basically. It's still got like a priority turn 1, and then it's gonna be insanely fast. So you can get a turn 2. It's still a swapper. It's still good. It's still decent. But it is in the argument for worst Apex in the game now. Compsognathus. The second strongest flock. Overall, this thing is pretty decent, unique. It's got above average flock health, above average damage. It's fast. It's got pretty good resistance. Decel immune. That's notable on this, especially because it helps it fight against. It helps it do more against its worst matchups, which are tanks. So that's nice. And then it's basically a compy Gen 1 moveset with Restricted Group Distraction on top. Restricted Group Distraction, of course, 2.14 got buffed with a cooldown decrease. So now it can spam that a bit more. Overall, Compsognathus is a pretty solid flock. You can bring it in, do Restricted Group Distraction, and then if one of the flock members is dead, do Alert Scurry on turn 2 to heal it up. And then you go Restricted Group Distraction again turn 3. It's got Swapping Distraction, so swapping it, it's pretty good. Overall, this thing is pretty strong. But it is outclassed by a new flock that was just added to 2.14. Alright, Haasnaxus. This is the other one, the other Apex that's in the argument for worst Apex now. It got buffed in 2.14. It basically just got 75% distract resistance, and that's it. So it's better than before, but still, it's tied with Magnus for the weakest Apex. Yeah, it's basically really good base stats, pretty solid resistances, and its moveset is quite mediocre. The On Escape's good, Ravenous Rampage is good, and these two are alright. Piercing Screech is just trash, though. Piercing Screech is just bad, mostly because of its cooldown being just awful. And it just doesn't have too many good turn 1 options. Like, Fearless Slap's okay, but it just isn't enough in this very hostile meta. Hadros Lux. Overall, I would say it's one of the better creatures in this tier. I will say. This thing this thing has pretty turbulent history. So in 2.9, it didn't get changed directly, but the resilient moves got changed to inflict vulnerability, which means that its resilient rampage inflicted vulnerability, its resilient strike inflicted vulnerability, and importantly, medium resilient counter inflicted vulnerability, which meant this thing would deal over 5,000 damage on turn 1, which was broken. So this thing had a patch where it was extremely OP, even more OP than it was before that. And then they nerfed it in 2.10. So they nerfed its damage from 1500 to 1350, and they changed Resilient Rampage to Decelerating Impact, which it got deceleration back, but it got significantly less damage output. Although it still has good damage output, it is still tanky. It still has that vulnerable medium resilient counter, which is really good on it. But it has been power crept by all the new things. By the still broken Skuna, by the new extremely overpowered Kyle's Locks. Yeah, it's just been power crept, but it's still alright. Mono the Rhino, another one that's been power crept. There's so many power crept creatures these days. Mono the Rhino is in the argument for best creature in the tier, in best creature mid tyrant. Although I think Mortem Rex is probably better. Um, yeah, it is the swapper that refuses to die. It's got shield galore, got distraction, got ridiculous resistances, and it's got good health with a pretty decent amount of armor. Its damage output's pretty bad, but its swap and damage is decent. It is, well, it's got okay speed. Definite impact kind of sucks, but it doesn't really need to do too much damage for what it is, just because it stalls forever. Um, Overall, a decent swapper and a good unique, but there are better options now. Um, so yeah. Mortem Rex. I would say this is probably the best creature in this tier. It got buffed in 2.14. Well, actually, I need to go back. It got I think it got slightly nerfed in 2.9 with with it losing a couple of resistances. I think it basically lost a couple, it got its resistances slightly nerfed, and then in 2.10 it got some of the resistances back, and in 2.11 they gave it a pretty extensive overhaul. They basically they completely changed Roar to be basically a group defense shouting strike clone to be a not basic move, where it was basically a group defense shattering strike with that then buffed your team's damage afterwards for a couple turns, but at a cooldown of 2. And they gave it a fatal strike as its basic, which on something that isn't a chomper would be one of the best basic moves in the game, but on a chomper it's just alright, I guess. And I saw that as a kind of side grade. Well, I saw that as a buff at first, then I saw it as a side grade. A lot of people saw it as a nerf. But yeah. And then in 2.14, they completely buffed it. They gave it stun immunity, they increased its health to 4,800, and they made Roar priority. The last point there is the big one. That means it just has intense combo potential now with the priority Roar. And it wins so many matchups it couldn't win before. Mortem is quite strong now. It is definitely a good check against Ankylus Lux, Imperatosuchus, Arctovasilis, Skuna. It beats a lot of top tier creatures. That said, it gets destroyed by a lot of top tier Cunnings. So yeah. Overall, I could see this being put in High Tyrant, but I didn't put it in High Tyrant. Alright, Quatorian. Quatorian got buffed in 2.11. And the one thing they did to it, actually they did two things. They buffed the health to 4350, and then they buffed its damage from 1450 to 1600, which made it very powerful. It was already a pretty solid unique, and then this buff made it a very good unique. And then it had a high time for a few patches, and now it's gotten a little bit power craft, but it is still a very powerful unique. It's probably tied with Mono Rhino for strongest unique in the tier. In Mid Tyrant, it's now a stally, very fast Cunning that now does pretty decent damage now. Long invincibility is absolutely amazing. Null Rampage, it's okay for it. It means that the only way to block this thing's damage with Null Rampage is either armor or a flock. It's got great stall potential. It's got pretty solid resistances. It's just that a lot of the meta things wreck it, like the top tanks, and yeah. But overall, still quite good. It is allergic to Mortem Rex though now, and you're going to be seeing Mortem Rex a lot. Trudoboa. This is added in 2.13. This is a unique mega hybrid. Yeah, it's Magenta Boa plus Troodon. So it's got pretty average stats across the board with some really nice resistances. And a pretty powerful moveset. So this Shielded Alert Strike is basically Shielded Decelerating Strike, but better. Group Cleansing Fatal Strike, it's basically... yeah, it's basically Ferocious Strike that cleanses. And Precise Distracting Impact, which is basically Restricted Group Distraction, but it's not group, but it's also precise. and Group Cunning Rampage, which has a delay of 2 for some stupid reason. And then it's got Raking Counter and Ferocious Shield on Escape, which is basically on Escape Dust Cloud with the Cleanse attached. Overall, this thing is pretty strong, although I do think it's a little bit overrated. It's not better than Spino Constrictor. Just stop lying. Yeah, it's still really nice. It's got some pretty alright cooldowns. Like, once you get to turn 3, you can alternate the Impact and the Rampage. It's got that really good Ferocious Strike with the counter. It's got a good on escape if it's distraction immune. Overall, it's a good cunning resilient counterattacker. Alright, High Tyrant. The runner-up of the top. Starting with probably the best in this tier, Alberto Spinos. This was added in 2.13, and it was very disappointing. It had 3,900 health, it had 1,200 damage, it had 124 speed, 10% crit chance, it wasn't even decel immune. Basically, so it had a bit less health than it does now, and a lot less damage, slightly less speed, less bleed resistance, less decel resistance, less crit chance, and it had lethal swoop here. It did have one of the best basic moves in the game, and it's still a very powerful basic move. But yeah. And then, in the middle of 2.13, they gave it a pretty solid buff. Basically, they increased its bleed resistance, they gave it DSL immune, they increased its crit chance and speed, and they increased its health, and they heavily increased its damage. So basically, they did everything that it has now, except for Merciless Alert. In 2.14, they gave it Merciless Alert. So, yeah, this is the impacts that Eudarx has now. This is a very good unique now. It can do this on turn 1 and apply bleed while doing good damage. Then it can do this priority impact on turn 2, or it can do Fierce Rampage for even more damage. Admittedly, the swap in is like the niche part of it that isn't used too much. Overall, this thing is a beast, and it does a lot. In fact, it's probably the reason that Spino Constrictor is getting power crept now. But yeah. Ordontic Nathis, this is the best flock in the game, added in 2.14. 2.14 completely changed the meta a lot. And probably the biggest, like, meta shifting update since, I would say, 2.9. But yeah, this thing is very, very powerful. It's got, I would say, slightly below average flock health, but it's got good damage, it's somewhat fast, good resistances, and a very good moveset. Like, this moveset is insane. Sure, its turn 1's pretty bad, but after that, it goes ham. First of all, it's got Decelerating Side Flap, which is, again, Side Flap with a cooldown, but it decelerates, which is pretty nice. And then, Definite Alert Frenzy. Definite Alert Frenzy is, it's a misleading name, but it's a very good move. If you're secure, you basically do a turn 2 armor-piercing devastation with the speed up, and then if you're threatened, which you probably will be, it's a armor-piercing rampage with a rally heal and a big speed increase. And it also has DSR, of course. This counter doesn't matter at all. Alert the Flock. Swap in that heals, yeah. Except it's only on one member, so that's not very good. And then Accelerated Invincibility on Escape's pretty decent. Overall, this thing is fierce, well, predominantly fierce, but it is wild card. It's a flock that is very annoying and very powerful. Overall, it's basically Gomzacalis on crack, but with fierce and resilient attached to it. This thing's a beast. Gorgotribax. The cunning apex that has stuck with us through and through. This thing has not changed at all since even since it was added in 2.3. This thing has still been with us. Like, the only apex that hasn't been changed since 2.8 is Gorgotribax. Yeah. It's still a Gorgotribax. It still has the good health and damage with the low speed, like, weird stats for our cunning. It still has the very good resistance. It still has a very good moveset. Like, it has great turn 1, cautious impact, and then you can combo that. And if you're on Revenge, the only way to block Revenge Nullifying Rampage is by either being armored or being a flock. And then Revenge Nullifying Rampage on turn 2 for if you're not on Revenge to do even extra damage. It's a cunning that can cripple tanks, basically. Or at least cripple some tanks. This thing is a beast. It's just so strong. It's got good. It can survive quite a while because the distracts and dodge, and also good health and a lot of resistances. It does a lot of damage to things, and it can still see itself up with 2 separate moves. This thing is very good. So yeah, overall, a very powerful Apex, and the strongest Apex. Well, actually, probably not as good as Hydra Boa. It's in the middle of the Apex ranking now, but it is still good. It's still very, very good. Alright, next is Hydra Boa. This is added in 2.8. I will admit I overrated it quite a bit, and now before 2.14 it was kind of on the middle end of Apexes, and then it got buffed. Basically they gave it a little bit more armor, they gave it a lot more damage, they gave it distraction immune, yeah. So yeah, moderate, like, pretty, it's got above average survivability, it's got above average speed, now it has good damage, pretty solid resistances, and a weird moveset. Very good basic move, not so good, kind of not damaging move. Starts Impact kind of sucks. Fabled Fangs is alright. It should be showing it's precise. It is precise. It doesn't say precise in the description, but it shows on the icon, and it is precise. It does go through dodge. Priority bleed may seem pretty bad, but honestly, I don't think it's a huge issue. The counter increases its damage, and it has the best on escape in the game by far. Overall, this thing is pretty strong now. The resurgence of the bleed meta, well, it's still a tank meta, but with the resurgence of bleed as a meta force, has definitely helped this guy. Overall, Hydra Boa is very powerful, and it's a solid anti-meta. Yeah. Parasaurolops, the dominant swapper. This thing is so annoying in the meta. It's just annoying and powerful. It's the alternative to Monolith Rhino that still refuses to die, but does it through different means. It's got more health, but it lacks the armor. It's got significantly higher damage, but it's slower. It has a lot worse resistances, but it has a ridiculous amount of heals. This is a stupid amount of healing potential. It's got counter power heal too. It just has insane healing, and then it's also dual use, because you can use that as a revenge killer too, although you're mostly going to be using it as a swapper. Yeah, not much more needs to be said. It's just a swapper with lots of damage, like this is insane damage for a swap-in, and then constant healing. Yeah, this thing's a beast. 4X, added in 2.10. This thing was the best creature in the game for several patches, and then it was still top 3 for a couple more patches, and now now it is severely diminished. So when it was added at 4,050 health, 1,600 damage, same resistances and other, well, actually had 15% crit chance, same resistances and other stats. Critical size step had no cooldown, and it had a swap-in that was basically swap-in savagery with pinning, but it did less damage when it was distracted. So yeah. This thing was a beast. It was absolutely busted, actually. And then they nerfed it. They decreased the health, damage, and crit chance. They gave this a cooldown, and most of all, they removed the swap-in. Removing the swap-in was really what hurt it more than anything else. The cooldown on critical size, that's not really a very noticeable change. It's a very small change. The stat decreases, mostly the health and mostly the damage, or I guess kind of noticeable. But yeah, this thing is still very powerful. It still has a strong on escape. It still has good stats. It still got a instant distracting rampage on turn 1. On turn 3, it still has a defense shattering rampage and run with bleed. it's still very strong. It's just diminished compared to before. It's not an absolutely busted monster. But yeah, that's 4 Rex. Scorpius Rex Gen 3. Remember that 2.8 video I made? Yeah, I heavily underrated this. I was kind of dumb. I don't know why I underrated this, because this thing is an absolutely broken monster. Yeah. It's got pretty okay stats. It's got very strong resistances, and it has the best move in the game. Toxic Quills. Toxic Quills is ridiculous. It is a turn 1 stunning lethal wound impact. Let that sink in. That's kind of ridiculous. It also has a very strong swap in, a very strong stall move, a rampage to do after Toxic Quills. This thing basically determines whether you get to be Overlord or not. Because if this thing obliterates you, good luck being Overlord. Although, there are a couple exceptions. But generally, if this thing obliterates you, being Overlord is going to be pretty hard. Yeah, it is the gatekeeper. Spinal Constrictor. Remember when this thing was hot trash in 2.7? It was the weakest unique in the game. Well, now it is definitely not that. It got a huge buff in 2.9, an absolutely monstrous buff that made it one of the strongest uniques in the game. They gave it a big health buff. They gave it a big damage buff. They gave it some more speed. They gave it some more resistances, and they gave it evasive wounding strike instead of evasive stance, which is a huge upgrade because now it can bleed stack. It can delete half of almost anything's health on turn 1. Yeah. Wounding counter is still absolutely amazing. It's bleed that you can't cleanse because it happens with the counter attack. Storming outside. Yeah, it can delete like almost everything in this tier. In fact, everything in this tier that isn't Imperator Sucus or Referentum, or I think Octobacillus too. It can delete half of their health on turn 1. Like Colossus, the best creature in the game, half its health is gone on turn 1, and then Spinal Constrictor's gone on turn 2, but against it. But still, yeah, this thing is so good. Just the fact that it can do that much on turn 1 is great, and then it can follow up with its rampage on turn 2, or with an instant distraction if it's on low health to guarantee another bleeding counter. This thing is often going to get a kill. Yeah, and then it might even cripple the second creature they have. This thing is strong, and it's also got an Honest Cape on top. So yeah, this thing is a beast. Testicornibus. This has been on a roller coaster since 2.9. Well, since 2.8. 2.9. 2.9 gave it a huge buff. They increased its armor, they increased its speed, they increased its damage, they, I actually don't know if they changed its resistances in that update. They gave it Cleansing Sorting Impact instead of Resilient Impact, and then they gave it Counter Power Heal, which healed by 11% then. And then, it was absolutely broken. Then in 2.10, they gave it a bit of a nerf. They basically decreased its stun and swap prevention resistance, and then got rid of swap and heal. Still insane. And then at some point, they nerfed counter power heal to 6%. It was still really strong. Only now is it starting to get power crept by all the new crazy stuff being added, but it is still very strong. It's still stally. It still heals a lot. It still can do a lot of damage on turn 3. It still got good resistances. And it's still very quick with D-Cell Immune. Overall, still a very powerful unique and still a dominant threat in the unboosted environment. Boosted, not so much. Everyone's dropping it at the top. But yeah, unboosted, still very powerful. In this tier list is unboosted, so that's why it's in High Tyrant. Anyways, Overlord, the best of the best. Starting with the worst Overlord creature, Andrew Tops. This is added in 2.10, and it was pretty bad then. Well, it wasn't bad, but it was quite mediocre. Although a lot of people will say it was bad. It was that 3,300 health, it had 1550 damage. It had ridiculous damage output, but it was quite frail. And then in 2.11, 14, they gave it an absolutely gigantic buff. They gave it distraction immunity instead of 75% resistance. They increased stun resistance a bit. And they also increased its damage. It already had insane damage output, and they vastly increased its health to 3,900. Now, it is the ultimate revenge killer. This thing is stupidly good on revenge. Yeah, this thing is busted on revenge. On revenge, it obliterates almost everything. Without revenge, it can still do quite a bit. It's got it doesn't have very many resistances, but the resistances it does have are some very good resistances for it. It's got very good base stats and a pretty good moveset, especially on revenge. And this counter is ridiculous for it. It has a rampage on turn 1 for if it's on revenge, it has a cleansing impact. Ignore this move, it sucks. Yeah. This thing is a beast. I can see you putting it in High Tyrant, though. It does have a couple issues. But overall, I think this thing's sheer just potential on revenge puts it in Overlord. Albeit just barely. Now, to the best creature in the game. Ankylos Lux. Why? Why? First of all, why does it even have this? Why does it even have this name? It's Dirotosaur. Why is it a glow boy? It's a Dirotosaur is an ingredient. Okay, base stats don't look too impressive, and the resistances they look all right, but still also not too impressive. It's the moveset of this thing that's broken. Spear Vulnerability is one of the best basic moves. Hostile Glow. It doesn't show it here on the toolbox, but it applies vulnerability first, which basically makes it a 2.25x hit on turn 1, which is completely stupid. I don't know why it's like that, but it is. Alert Instant Shielded Strike, which is the same one that Ankylos has. And Resilient Shielded Rampage and Run, which is insane. It's a Rampage and Run that makes opponent vulnerable, which means that if you run into a swapper, that's doing 50% more damage against most creatures. Yeah. And it's got a big counter, and it's attracting immune. It has a very good swap in, and it has a non-escape. That means that unless the thing you're swapping to has a defense shatter on the swap in, which Parasothops does, but yeah. Then you're not doing any swap in damage to it. This thing is unbelievably overpowered. It is the best creature in the game, and it is firmly the best creature in the game. This thing power crept Skunosaurus. Let that sink in. Skunosaurus is still Overlord, but this thing power crept it. Yeah. That's enough said. Also, it's got the best design in the game. Fight me. It just looks cool. Alright, Artofacilis. Added 2.12, the first Apex hybrid and the first Mega hybrid. And one of the best creatures in the game, too. This is I would say this is firmly in the top 4, and I would say probably in the top 3, too, right now. So yeah. This thing, it has far better base stats than Ankylos Lux, with probably worse resistances, but still good resistances. And its moveset is also extremely powerful. Cenozoic Smack, it's a defense-shattering vulnerability strike, although for some reason it doesn't, it's basically kind of like it's a definite vulnerability strike that also cleanses distraction, but it doesn't pierce armor, and it doesn't remove cloak, it just removes dodge. But yeah. And Alert Arctic Blast is a impact that imposes vulnerability and decelerates, and when threatened, it also stuns. Yeah. And Alert Persistent Group Shields is basically defense shatters, but doesn't do any damage, and then it shields and increases your damage. And when it is threatened, it doesn't say this, but it makes it, the shield goes 100%, and it also increases its crit chance. And then Shielded Devastation, which it's devastation, but it shields, and it has counter power heal, and a swap in that shatters and slows them down, and then a healing speed up on escape. This thing is a setup monster. When it's not set up, it doesn't do very well, but when it's set up, it is unstoppable. It does insane damage on turn 3, and it is quite survivable, and is I would say quite versatile too. I don't have it. I'm not even close to having it. So ask someone more experienced what they think about it. They can explain this thing better than I can. Overall, it's insanely powerful. Imperatosuchus added in 2.14. The first Apex hybrid added since Hydra Bow in 2.8. Well, since Hydra Bow and Haas Maximus, but Haas Maximus was obtained first, and we knew about it first. All right, so yeah, this thing is a beast. It's tanky. It does good damage. It has very good resistances. It has a very good moveset. It's not as flashy as in Callus Lux or Artificialis, but it is definitely almost rivals them in power. Fierce Decelerating Strike. This thing is firmly in the top 4 and probably in the top 3. Um, all the top 4 is Apexes, though. So, Fierce Decelerating Strike, it's Fierce Strike, but it decelerates. Death Roll decelerates 75% for 3 turns, and then applies Bleed, and it's an armor-piercing impact. The icon says it defense shatters, but it doesn't. Bask, which is a stun, swap prevention, heal that increases damage. Bask is the main reason it's insanely powerful. Vulnerability Rampage, defense shattering counterattack, although Ludia is stupid and they didn't call it medium shattering counter, which is what it actually is. It's medium shattering counter. And No Escape Strike, which is also a stupid name because it's really a no escape ferocious strike. Ludia sucks at naming moves now, but this thing is incredibly powerful. Mainly Bask is its signature move that it uses to great effect because it stuns and it heals and then it increases its damage so that it can get a huge rampage off on the next turn. And plus that on escape is really good too. Again, literally nobody has this, but ask someone who can explain it better than me, I guess. Endotaurus. This was added in 2.10, and it is broken like all the other things in this tier. Insane damage and health. Pretty alright resistances. And one of the most busted movesets the game has ever seen. Its cloak is not used up by its counter. Think about that. So, basically, on turn 1, on Revenge, if your counter crits with the cloak, it literally one-shots the opponent. And then you still have that 2.5x cloak up to do a turn 2 Rampage. And if it's not on Revenge, it still has this cloak counter that does an insane amount of damage. It has an on-escape cloak. For turn 1, if you don't want to use cloak, it has a defense-shattering vulnerability impact. This thing is insane. Yeah, that's Endotaurus. I've said enough about Endotaurus. This thing is ridiculous. Alright. Referenantum. Either the 3rd or 4th best creature in the game. I would probably say 4th best. Behind the other 3 Apexes we discussed in this tier, but still insane. Refren got a huge buff in 2.14. And went from being the 2nd worst Apex to overpowered. They got a huge health buff. It got a slight speed buff. It got a crit chance buff. It got distraction immune. In fact, I think it maybe got some other resistance. Oh yeah, it got distraction immune. It got huge run resistance. I think they increased the stun resistance too, and bleed resistance. And then they made super distraction an impact and got rid of the delay, which is really the big part here. So now it has one of the most broken turn 1s in the game. It removes dodge, it has a very small chance to stun, it has bleed, it's an impact, and it 100% distracts. And then on turn 2, it has a cunning rampage, and it has very high base damage and health and speed, and very insane resistances, and yeah, and a free swap in. Oh my god, it is OP. Yeah, this thing, we don't know if it will yet, but there's a chance that it might power creep Scorpius Rex Gen 3, which is something that I don't think anyone would see possible. Yeah, this thing is broken. a huge priority hit turn 1 that has all these status effects on top of a rampage on turn 2. And it does so much now. Again, I don't have it yet. I don't have any of the Apexes. I am working on that. I will I will try to do Apex raids, but that is easier said than done. But yeah, Referent is broken now. And now the last creature, Skunosaurus, which has been on quite a ride since 2.7. It got buffed in 2.7 from being a pretty low level unique to being a very high level unique. And then in 2.9, it got another buff. It became absolutely broken. It still had mini resilient counter, which then applied vulnerability, which made it ridiculous. And it also got instant group distraction impact instead of restricted group distraction. And it was broken for 2 patches in a row. And then in 2.10, they... No, in 2.11, they nerfed it. They changed medium resilient counter to decelerating counter, so it still has a big counter, it just doesn't apply vulnerable anymore. And they changed the instant hit to restricted group distraction. I think they also buffed the health in 2.9. And then they nerfed the damage in 2.11 as well. That was still insane. And then in 2.14, they buffed it again by reducing the cooldown on this. Oh my god. And so yeah, it is still a wall with huge, consistent damage output, with great resistances, with a very good moveset, and yeah, it's literally Notopatatite on crack. It is Notopatatite, but better in almost every way. It is Notopatatite, but actually good. Basically, this thing is broken. Like, it is purely broken. It's the best creature in this tier that isn't an Apex. So yeah, that's the end of the tier list series. I hope you guys enjoyed this. There's so many creatures now. Yeah. Let me know what you guys think of the tier list. You're probably gonna hate it because everyone hates my tier list, but still. What do you think of the direction the game's going in? I can tell you, I don't like the direction this game's going in. Ludia / Jam City is making a bunch of terrible decisions. Yeah. What am I saying? Oh yeah. Like and subscribe if you want to. Leave suggestions for what I should do next, because I'm not really sure. And yeah. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.